All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Zielinski. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ShapeConnect. So I think most of you know us. We're a business-to-business software and services matching platform. We're helping companies, guide those key decisions about finding the right vendors for their business needs and making that process of creating great B2B partnerships possible through our platform. So, of course, we want to share all the expertise that many of our vendors on ShapeConnect have amongst the community. And MindCart seem to be, in all they do with market research right now, seem to be a very relevant topic. I think, just doing some research of our own, the number one thing people wanted to prioritize this year was online growth. And online growth is also predicated on, deeply understanding your customers. And that is what MindCart does and what their experts can do. They have a deep research background amongst their team, a very interesting methodology, and they're kind of democratizing market research for small businesses and startups who maybe haven't had access to this kind of support before and this type of methodology. So really excited about what they're going to talk about, and any questions that come up along the way, they're happy to answer them. So without further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves and take it from here.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Nick Bellissimo. I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm currently the Chief Science Officer here at MindCart AI. I have a fairly extensive background in designing clinical trials in the area of nutrition and health. My day job is a professor here in Toronto. And I became interested in consumer research and consumer science several years ago, and interacting with one of our mentors, Dr. Howard Moskowitz, who really turned me on to this idea of matching messages to the right consumers. And so that's kind of where, sort of a little bit of the history around where kind of MindCart AI has come into the fold here. And then we have Sophia. Sophia, maybe you can introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sophia. I'm the Director of Customer Success at MindCart, and I help companies understand their customers better by facilitating the MindCart research process.
All right, great. So Sophia, are you going to get started?
Yep. So we'll be discussing how we help companies create and sell market-leading products, how the MindCart approach differs from other approaches, and how we've helped companies craft messaging that matters. So how do we help companies create and sell market-leading products? A successful product launch or marketing campaign launch requires three things. It requires the right product or service or brand or idea with the right message for the right person. So MindCart helps companies identify the right product with the right message for the right person. And we do that by using iterative experimentation to first identify your buyer personas. That gives us the right person. And then identify the specific features and value propositions that matter most to each of those different buyer personas. And that gives us the right product. And finally, we identify the most effective messaging to communicate those features and value propositions to each different buyer persona in a way that truly resonates with them. And that gives us the right message. This concept of iterative experimentation is central to MindCart's research approach. So let's take a look at what that experimentation process looks like. To create a MindCart experiment, step one is you need to come up with 16 ideas or concepts or phrases or statements that you'll be testing. So in a different experimental setting, you would call those test stimuli. So you come up with 16 of these test stimuli, so to speak, and you put them into the pattern sequencer, which generates an experiment. The link is then sent out to respondents and they can participate in the experiment. So we're actually going to follow one of these links. Sorry, I want to start from the beginning here. So this is the screen that respondents begin on when they start to participate in the experiment. So there's generally one or two or a few of these preliminary questions. And then there's a 1 to 2 sentence explanation of the purpose of the experiment. And then they're told that they're going to see a series of 24 screens, and each screen will contain the same question. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that each respondent sees 24 screens, and that's basically what the experiment entails. So once they get through the instructions, they begin the experiment, and this is what it looks like. So at the top here, we see that we're on screen 1 of 24. Right below that, we have our rating question. So that's, would you purchase coffee with the features described below? We have a combination of messages, and one of these test stimuli is an image. So on our platform, you're actually able to test up to 4 images per experiment. And so this one comes bundled with text. So it says cappuccino, and the image is of cappuccino. The second idea here is espresso roast, and then the third one is mocha flavor. So when the respondents look at the screen, they're asked, would you purchase coffee with the features described below? They consider these features on the screen, and then they click thumbs up if they would purchase it based on those features, or thumbs down if they wouldn't. When you go to the next screen, you see the rating question and the scale remain the same, but the messages in the box in the middle here have changed. So as I mentioned earlier, experiments are generated by inputting 16 ideas into the pattern sequencer. And this box that sits between the rating question and the rating scale contains a unique mixture of 2 to 4 of those 16 ideas on each screen that the respondents read and rate. So if we go to the next screen, you will see that it's a different combination. So this screen has 2, the previous one had 4, and it's always a different combination of messages. And the experimental design ensures that no 2 respondents ever see the same set of 24 screens. And that basically allows us to measure interactions within and across combinations of messages, rather than repeatedly testing the same combinations. So once each respondent has rated each of the 24 screens and completed the experiment, our proprietary algorithms calculate a model for each of those respondents, which identifies the value ascribed to each of the 16 ideas for each respondent. Then the respondents are clustered using mathematical modeling, which produces non-overlapping segments that we call mindsets. So each mindset is distinct because it's represented by a pattern of responses that's significantly different from the other mindsets, and meaningful because it consists of respondents who exhibited similar patterns in their evaluation of the ideas. So finally, our platform produces a report that identifies 2 key metrics. So we have the distinct mindsets, which represent the distinct patterns of thinking. And we also know the exact value ascribed to each of the 16 ideas by each of those different mindsets. Okay, before I go on, are there any questions? Is the experimental process clear, straightforward, or not so much?
I have a quick one, Sophia. So when a company is thinking about those statements they want to use, I think you call them stimuli, but effectively statements they want to test in terms of what people will buy. How do they craft those? What should they do? Is there an exercise ahead of conducting market research that would help you put those together?
Yes. So before you start putting together a list of 16 ideas to test, you need to ask yourself what your objective is and how much you already know about your target market. So If you're kind of still in the very, very preliminary stages, let's say you want to produce a new product, right? You're a product developer, you want to create a new product. You're going to be starting very, very broad. You're going to be starting with ideas that basically describe the beliefs, values, and preferences that guide people to buy that. So like, what is the underlying reasons for why they need this product? And then from there, you would do more experiments to get down to the details. But let's say you already have a product and you have an established website. And let's say you want to know whether the messages on your website are working as intended. You could take 16 messages straight from your website, throw them into the pattern sequencer, and then just see how people respond to them and see which ones are rated very, very positively or very, very negatively. Does that make sense?
For me, it does, yes.
Got it. Okay. Are there any other questions? Let me know if anyone's like raising their hand or anything, because I can't see what anyone's up to.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah, if any hands pop up, I'll let you know, Sophia.
Got it. Okay. So now that you have kind of a general idea of how a single MindCart experiment works, let's talk about the iterative experimentation process. So iterative experimentation basically just means using insights from experiment 1 to inform the design of experiment 2, and then using the insights from experiments 1 and 2 to inform the design of experiment 3, and so on. This method of repeated testing enables us to validate insights, but more importantly, it allows us to work our way down from big picture insights to granular details. So a single experiment is like a snapshot. It gives you a big picture idea of what's going on. And as you iterate, you dig deeper into those insights with each iteration, and you uncover the intricacies that make up that big picture idea. For example, let's say you run an experiment to identify buyer personas for a grab-and-go coffee product. You get the results from experiment 1, and you learn that there is a large subset of people who like coffee with added flavors. We'll call those people flavor seekers. In experiment 2, you test a variety of different flavors, and you find that the hazelnut vanilla flavor is the winning flavor. And it's basically what the flavor seeking group is responding most positively to. And then in experiment 3, you test different catchphrases against each other to find the best messaging to inform the flavor seekers of the hazelnut vanilla flavor that you're selling. And so you identify the winning message and you implement it. So following that sequence of insights, we can see that experiment 1 gave us the right person. Experiment 2 gave us the right product. And then experiment 3 gave us the right message. And that's pretty much how we use iterative experimentation to validate insights across experiments and work our way down from big picture insights to granular ones. Now I'll pass it over to Nick.
Thanks, Sophia. I just want to talk briefly about, a little bit around the science that underlines the MindCart platform. It really is a relatively easy process. And to answer Brian's earlier question, you don't really require a lot of, prior knowledge to run an experiment. And typically what happens, especially when we walk, clients through this process, usually it involves a 30 to 45-minute brainstorming session to really identify the topic of interest. What do you really want to get out of the experiment? And then coming up with the ideas. And really the most important thing is you want to get the messaging right. But that doesn't mean necessarily having to go slow. You don't have to go slow because you don't know which of your messages are going to work and which won't work, or which we're going to engage people and which are going to turn people off. And the idea is to come up with a set of 16 elements or messages clustered under 4 general topic areas that are important to that overall theme that you're trying to get after. And then you run the experiment. The experiment will tell you immediately what works and what doesn't. And there are really 3 key things that you want to get out of an experiment. It has to be efficacious. If you're going to do iterative experiments, it has to be relatively inexpensive, right? And finally, you need to make sure that it's actually measuring what you want it to measure. And so when we think about consumers and traditional segmentation, we typically think about consumer segmentation in terms of demographics, sociodemographics, geographics, psychographics. That is, you can somehow predict how a person thinks based on where they live, some sort of underlying marker of who they are, or again, some random general metric, whether it be age, gender, income, marital status, etc. So segmentation is not new. This is quite common. And in fact, if you look at the spread of consumer research tools, they all offer some sort of segmentation. The question is how do you collect that information? And even within a group of individuals who may look homogenous, the reality is they probably don't think alike. So you can still segment individuals even within a tightly selected range of demographic data. And so the reason it can be problematic, next slide, please, is, well, if I gave you a list of demographic data, and this is all clustered around these 2 images, travels often, is married, is male, is famous, is born in 1948, has an annual, has an income or net worth of greater than $10 million, you would say, I think I know who my customer is, right? But the reality is these are potentially two different people. Now, they could very well respond similarly based on their demographic data, or they can be completely different. The question is, you don't really know, and you really have to run these kinds of experiments to really get into the get in at a granular level to really understand the motivating factors that get people closer to yes. So demographics is useful, but it's really only part of the solution. You really need to figure out what motivates each of those individuals when it comes to a particular product or service that's being presented to them. All right, next slide. All right, and this is an example. We've run, over the years, many different studies, lots of published literature using the underlying science. And what we have here is simply a distribution of consumer mindsets based on, demographic, geographic, or the psychographic data. So if you look at the top left panel, you'll see geographic. Can you actually predict, membership in a particular consumer mindset based on where they live? And if you look at the pattern across mindset 1, which is the far left, over to 2, 3, and then the total panel, you'll see a very similar distribution of individuals and then those consumer mindsets. Same thing with psychographic. Right? This is real data from an experiment we ran not too long ago. But the point is, again, if you look at the pattern of individuals in each of those consumer mindsets, you cannot predict membership based on demographics. So having a homogeneous group does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to have homogeneous thinking. Right? And same thing with the demographic data, because you'll see that the distribution is similar, but again, you'll see across, the individual age ranges, or whether it's, what region you're from, that those individuals are dispersed across consumer mindsets. So the question is, how do you get deep inside a person's mind to understand the 1, 2, maybe 3 things that motivate them to get close to the yes when making a purchasing decision. All right, next slide. And of course, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there are really a number of things you need to consider, right? Efficacy, speed, and cost. Is it efficacious? How long is it going to take you? How much time do you really have? And then obviously cost, especially in a world where experimentation is going to become the norm. You know, I'm not a believer in one and done. You've seen that in the world over the last couple of years, that you need multiple experiments to get your messaging or to really have clear insight on your dependent measures. And there are a number of different methods. Some require, some are very quick, some are inexpensive, and some are more or less efficacious. We all consider consumer research from the perspective of surveying people, sending out questionnaires. The question is, what do most people do with that information? What are they doing in an actionable way when they get a survey result back? Well, they report it. It gives you sort of a map of what may be happening, but it doesn't get to granularity. And I would suggest, just based on our own experience and the individuals in our team, especially in the business sector, we're getting a lot of, well, I innately understand what needs to be done. There's an awful lot of guesswork. You know, you could use some other tools like social scraping. I think these are all important tools, but these would go into a brainstorming session that ultimately can feed into some higher level, more efficacious experimental designs. Surveys, again, surveys are sort of the approach of choice. Why? Because they're inexpensive. But I would question whether insights generated from surveys really leads to actionable, leads to action. Focus groups, again, I think they're important, but a focus group is not the end all be all. I really see focus groups as the beginning that can be put into using that information that can be pulled and then incorporated in some additional experimental design. So if you look at the bottom right quadrant, then you have specialist interview techniques, message testing research. Again, very relatively efficacious, but speed. They take an awful lot of time. There are new methods that certainly have improved over time. But again, you want to be able to take that high level work and then test it on a consumer panel, a much broader consumer panel, a larger sample size of people, testing those messages and ideas instantaneously or virtually instantaneously in really any part of the world, or you can go as local as a particular zip code or neighborhood in a particular city or community. And then we have pattern analysis. Now, within pattern analysis, this is really conjoint. So conjoint kind of lives in this space. MindCart AI is really a special form of conjoint analysis. The only difference between our approach and some of the other methods that exist is very simple. We don't predetermine patterns. The patterns are determined, and Sophia did a great job, I think, showing this, is that you actually determine the patterns emerge from the experiment. You're not predetermining any of the patterns. So you actually don't have to go in with any prior knowledge. You go in and you really need to come up with ideas. The experiment then determines the patterns and determines the clusters. It's all mathematical, right? And that's really what you want to get to. You want to get to evidence-based recommendations and guidance. And you only can do that through experimental design, right? The other methods are very useful, but I see them as incorporating the insights into an objective experimental design that gives you true and actionable and definitive insights, right? You wouldn't test the efficacy of a vaccine or a drug using some of these other methods. You would use a randomized control trial. So we look at pattern analysis and the underlying science and the experimental design as sort of a gold standard, robust experimental design that allows for cause and effect, right? Now, what do you put into an A/B experiment? Again, this is often a very common method that people use. Well, what do you put in an A/B experiment? Well, it's very simple, right? You can A/B test yourself into anonymity, right? Out of existence, because it's not necessarily definitive, right? And what combinations of ideas or messages and comparisons, it's unlimited. So I think what pattern analysis and this special form of conjoint does, it gives you the ideas, the messages that can be tested ultimately in an A/B experiment. But what it does is it reduces, theoretically, the number of experiments that you would do, right? So that saves you time, saves you money, and you are working with some of the complementary technologies and methodologies so that you can come up with a definitive final conclusion. That's really important. Otherwise, you're just going to learn yourself to death in a cycle of just learning and learning, but no action. And so what we want to do is really disrupt and democratize the way this is done, and put this in the hands of small and medium-sized businesses who historically have used some of these other methods, but now be able to incorporate some new technology into their portfolio that generates rapid insights, is super fast, and is not going to break the bank, because we're all mindful of that, especially as we transition into sort of the next phase of this new normal. Next slide, Sophia. And I think this is where I pass it back over to Sophia.
Has Danny joined the call, or is it just us,
Well,
Nick?
well, if not, I can keep going, or you can go. It's up to you. I'll just keep going.
Okay.
Only a few more slides. So this is a case study from our chief science advisor, Dr. Howard Moskowitz. So he worked with a number of larger brands over the years. This is a study that he contributed to several years ago. But the idea was, one of these larger companies was interested in developing a new product, and so the idea was, well, what do we name this thing? And what do we say about it in a kind of a short sort of infomercial spot? Let's go to the next slide. So obviously, they used a variation of this experimental design where they tested the sort of verbatim messages that could potentially go into a short spot, a short infomercial, a short advertisement, short commercial, etc. And so they used a variation or a version of the experimental design that we're presenting here. And next slide, please. And they were able to identify, again, through mathematical modeling. This is done instantaneously for you. It's all done in the background. And they were able to identify a number of consumer mindsets, right? And they found that within this test pool of participants, they found that certain messages resonate more with one group versus another. And what did they find? Well, group one was very interested in the messages that you see here on the bottom left. No need to pre-treat stains, no more scrubbing. So they're really interested in that aspect. Mindset two responded to messages related to removing stains with pressurized stain removers instead of friction. And then the third group, again, responded to the following three messages. So what do you do from a practical perspective when you identify, three consumer mindsets? The question that we often hear is, well, which one of these groups is our customer? Who are our customers? I don't know. So in the absence of knowing who your customer is, you would take the winning ideas from each of the three consumer mindset groups and use that for targeted messaging, whether that's on social media, whether that's in an email blast. However it's done, you want to be able to take winning ideas and send those and put those in your campaign. So next slide, Sophia. So the verbatim, right? The actual messages, right? In this case, it's a script. This is just an example of a script, and they took the winning ideas from each of the three mindsets and incorporated them into this script here, which ultimately formed the basis Obviously, there was a little bit more work, or I should say a lot more work, I'm sure, that was involved in this process. But then from there, they were able to incorporate the exact messages from the experiment into the advertisement. Next slide, Sophia. Right. And in fact, that particular advertisement is readily available online. And so you can, if you don't take my word for it, you can search it, and you'll see that these messages were used verbatim in that. But this is the point. The point is you need to be able to, back to Sophia's point, is to be able to link the exact messages to the right people. And of course, we've done this. Just some examples of some of the work that we've done. Everything from optimizing indoor lighting to home and beauty products, to a new state of the art with functional ingredients snack. And we did different things. In the case of these indoor lights, it was really about improving website and copy testing. So what are the messages? What are the taglines that should appear, right? That are going to catch the attention of people, surfing through the internet. In the case of home and beauty products, again, it was about identifying product personas and product features, etc. And then ultimately, in the case of a new product, a new snack, it's around, again, what are the catchy statements for their marketing campaign? So a number of different things that can be done, incorporating what I call experimentation, not surveys, right? And I think with that, we'll end there. So thank you for your time. We're happy to take any questions that you may have. And if Danny's here, then he can join in on the discussion. So thank you. Great. I'm just looking at, there's some questions, I think, Brian.
Yeah, I'm looking at them now. It's Daniel had to run, but he was interested in a technical paper if it's available around the technology. He's interested to learn more. I know Daniel, and he has a very cool, almost metaverse. I don't even want to say almost. It kind of is a metaverse platform called GamerJive that has a lot of virtual capability for online conventions and things like that. So I know they're kind of on the forefront of many things. So I'm sure that's why this is all intriguing. Yep. So if there's a technical paper, do you have something like that in your mix?
Yeah. So there's probably 300 to 400 papers using the underlying science in the published literature. So we can absolutely share, some of these studies with you and with Daniel.
Excellent. I think one other interesting question that has come up when I've talked about MindCart is around the history of it. How you brought this together as a company, what this methodology is based around, and maybe a little bit of your backgrounds intermixed with that, because I think it's unique in how you built this company.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide some of that. I spent a lot of my, the last 20 years working in academia as a professor, and I was frustrated with the way research was done. In that, we spent an awful lot of time writing grants, securing funding, training people, running the trials. And then at that point is where everything kind of falls apart. In that, taking the insights from our experiments and making them actionable. And I would say even to this day, that gap still remains. That we have an awful lot of science that just sort of advances the science, but it just sits on a shelf. And what I became frustrated, especially as a nutritional scientist, is how do we take our science and then make it actionable? And I don't think we're doing a particularly good job, really across the board. I think some people are doing a better job than others. So I was looking for methods and tools and ways of doing that can help me with knowledge mobilization, knowledge translation. Now, on the business side, that sounds like, how do I get the messages to the right people so that uptake of our messaging actually resonates with them. So that's kind of how I got into this. Our colleague, Dr. Moskowitz, has been, who developed the science, has used it for many, many, many years in a variety of spaces. Everything from, selling products to, sorting out things like how do we improve messaging in the area of charitable giving, for example. How do we potentially help people follow medical advice, right? So these are sort of the areas that kind of intrigued me. And then there's obviously this whole other market, a whole other business around, and then the idea then was, how do we then take the science and package it in a way that it doesn't require a PhD in biostatistics to be able to run one of these experiments. So that's, I think, kind of sort of the genesis around, kind of where MindCart started. The idea of taking a very powerful and efficacious experimental approach and simplifying it so the average person can use it. That doesn't mean people with more sophisticated interest in biostatistics couldn't make use of it either. But the point is, we want to make it super easy so that startups and SMEs have the same competitive advantage, theoretically, some of the larger companies who've used this over the years. That's sort of kind of how I got into it. That's the reason why I think MindCart is here, and we really are trying to democratize and disrupt the entire space. And with your help, Brian, and your team and your network, I think we can start, laying the seeds and the foundation I think is needed to get people to actually start winning. Rather than deep learning, we want people to receive actionable insights so they can start making smarter decisions.
Hey, Nick, my name's Matt. I have a question for you. Thanks for this presentation, by the way. It's super helpful and insightful. I think you kind of started to get toward on the tail end of what you were just saying, so that MindCart can be helpful for like a startup or an SME. Is there like a sweet spot size of a company, or is no company like too small to really benefit from this kind of offering?
Yeah, I mean, I see it sort of helping really right across the board. Everything from, do we have a viable idea here? Like, what do consumers think about our product? It could be a bunch of, college and university students who are coming together and they want to just, they think they have a brilliant idea. Again, this is about intuition. They may very well be right, but they need to start thinking about, okay, how do we start selling this idea to investors, to consumers, and even to ourselves? And how do we bring people into our own business? What do potential future employees need to hear to get excited about what we're really passionate about? All right. I think the way we sort of generate our pricing, I think the barrier to entry is very, very low. And that's because we've, across the board, there's a lot of different tools and techniques at different price points. And I would say many of them, the barrier to entry is quite high. So I really see this helping everything from, should we actually start a startup, to, what should we be doing in a multi-million-dollar campaign, and everything in between. I think the sweet spot for us has been small to medium-sized businesses, especially when purse string holders are making decisions. Right? That's kind of where we've done particularly well, and that's really where we want to, especially as we try and disrupt the space. We want the little guy to have the same advantage, at least when it comes to messaging and social, and the marketing, that maybe some of these other companies have, because by using this linchpin technology.
Well, very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've always found it surprising. I've been through a couple experiments with both customers and a bit through our platform. You come in with assumptions and you perceive your clients a certain way in statements that you utilize, and then all of a sudden you get this information back and you become surprised. And I think it's a bit humbling at times. Just there's a lot more to understand, and that's what I've always found interesting about the experiments is just you can't always assume, oh, I've been in a certain industry for a period of time and I have it all figured out. There's a lot to uncover.
Right, and you know that's one of the key outcomes of an experiment is you're actually receiving results that are objectively true. You know, they're experimentally derived. There's no predetermined matching of ideas. The clustering is all mathematical, and sometimes the results will be in direct opposition to what you truly believe. The question is you have to sort of come to grips with that, right? And sometimes it's a painful exercise, and we've seen the results of people not using the insights, and we've seen the benefits of people slowly coming around and starting to incorporate, hey, this is what consumers actually are thinking and what they're telling you, right? So I think it's super important to use experimentation on a regular basis to drive at least internal discussions around what to do, rather than sort of guessing, you know, or intuition. I mean, I would say, what percentage of the population has this internal compass where everything they do turns to gold? I would say it's a very small percentage of people. I'm certainly not one of those individuals. So in the absence of data, then you're dealing with intuition, but I prefer data. I prefer science to drive my decision making. I see there's another question from Sharon. Brian, can I answer that question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is also a really important point, because there are a number of different tools, everything from, you know, dollars to thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. We're sort of in the middle, and so the average cost is hundreds of dollars. This really depends on who you're trying to target, your target market, the number of respondents that you ultimately include in an experiment, but certainly in the hundreds of dollars or the very low 1,000+ range, up to 2. But you know, the point is, when you look at it in terms of the number of impressions, you're really looking at about 50 cents an impression, somewhere in that range. Again, depends how specific you want to go. Depends how much time you need with us. I mean, the reality is these are experiments that can be done on a regular basis. And we actually highly recommend it. Our CEO, Danny Moskowitz, calls it the drip method. And that is running experiments monthly or, you know, every quarter, different times of year. But the reason our cost is where it is because we recognize the value of iterative experimentation. And this whole notion of one and done is not the way evidence-based guidance works. And so I would recommend regular experiments. I would say, you know, at least every quarter, even running the exact same experiment at 3 or 4 different times of year can help with your, you know, your sort of seasonal campaigns. Certainly with different products and messaging, even your branding may change over time. The question is, do you want to remain nimble, or do you just want to get the science the first time and then remain static, right? And so we definitely recommend that individuals run experiments on a regular basis. Yeah, sure. So I think there's another question from Sharon is, how do we find, so we tap into consumer panels. And so when we design an experiment, we can tap into various consumer panels to get at that granular, you know, socio-demographic, geographic, psychographic consumer base that you might be interested in. But we've done lots of experiments where we ran experiments in different countries, and oftentimes we see that the mindsets are fairly static, even across countries. They may change over time, but at least you have a mechanism where you can identify those changes. So let's say something happens in the market, and if you're running experiments on a monthly basis, you can actually predict and actually be very quick. You can quickly act by knowing exactly what's changed, right? versus trying to catch up after the fact. Because consumer mindset sentiment, yes, is static on a number of areas, but something could happen. A pandemic, for example, can happen. Well, what happens? Now you have a whole bunch of people online. Well, what's happening now around the world? Things are starting to reopen. Well, you're going to have to use different strategies and methods. Maybe the messaging has to change, but is to be able to be nimble to run experimentation and experiments, I think that's very powerful. And again, at a very fair entry point. Very fair entry point, at least in our opinion.
I feel like one of the most valuable aspects too is when you're looking to do marketing or build a website, online ads, this can very much impact those assets and those campaigns and make them more successful. You know, a lot of the companies that come to us say, we need a new website. Some of it is looking at what they currently have and understanding the background of what they've done before, you know, in terms of research, if any, to impact what they put out on their website or any of their other social media campaigns, etc. But if they haven't done something like this, we have advocated for it, because, you know, you're doing something like a marketplace, and that decision is there's just a lot, and it just seems like a lot of nuanced factors. Little things can make a big impact. And I think this actually over time feels like it reduces spend in some ways, because you're not redoing things, or it takes a lot of guesswork out of the process.
Right, and I think you raise an important point. Experiments, especially in the digital marketing space, experimentation has to be ecologically relevant, right? You want to be able to mimic real life, and I often use the example of, you go to the grocery store with a list of 3 or 4 things, and you when you get home, there's 20 things in your shopping bag, right? So the question is, something during that grocery shopping experience caught your attention, got you to stop, look, pick up the package, and make a purchasing decision, right? You may not purchase it the first time, but with repeated exposure, because we can identify what engages those individuals, we can get them closer to yes, right? So this is kind of what online shopping is like. You may have something in mind. You may do a search and 500 things pop up in your search, and you're scrolling through until you see something you like, an image, a message, an idea, right? And the longer you can keep people in that state of mind, the more likely you are to convert those people into a customer, right? I have a particular interest in using the technology to help with healthful eating, right? So let's say you launch a new healthy food product. Well, how does that product stand out among the sea of products, right? And this is what we're able to identify using our experimental design, is what people like, what they don't like, and being able to know exactly what they like, even if they're not able to articulate that to us, right? Because a person, they know what they like when they see it, but they may not necessarily be able to articulate that to you. They may not even know what it is about a message or an image that actually resonates with them. But we know, we can find out. And I think this can be super helpful, whether it's website optimization, social media campaigns, etc. It can be very useful. Sophia, do you have anything that you want to add? I apologize. But if you have anything that you'd like to add, this would be great. I don't get a chance to talk very much, so anytime someone gives me a platform, I take advantage of it.
No, and you're very knowledgeable on the science, and that's why I'm happy that you took the questions. It was great. But the only thing that I would add is kind of, it's not just that we can help businesses of different sizes, it's that it doesn't really matter the industry that you're in. I would say that this kind of research is relevant. So we've used it in a more academic setting. So as Nick mentioned, there's kind of like a wealth of data out there, published data on the use of the science. So kind of in more of the academic setting, we've used it. I've used it with one of my clients who's a YouTube content creator, and he finds it very useful to be able to come up with, well, not come up with, but test video content in advance and see what it is about a topic that his viewers want to hear. So it doesn't just apply to like standard businesses. I would say that it pretty much applies in any field where you're trying to influence people's behavior and either purchasing intent, viewing intent, whatever it is. Whenever you're trying to kind of convince someone of your product, service, brand, idea, whatever it is, I would say that this science is useful.
And I'll just add just one more final thought. You know, at the end of the day, we are a technology provider. We're really scientists, and what we're trying to do is take this very complex science, simplify it, so that virtually anyone can use it. But in the hands of a marketer, I think the insights can be incredibly powerful. Right, so it's about matching the science with individuals who are ready to make and to incorporate the research into their practice, and I think that's really important for us. And the individuals who do that tend to do it with data and with science in hand. They can feel a little better that they've at least completed a consumer research study that provides them with actionable insights, rather than simply deep learning, where the insights and the next steps are not immediately available. I often say to people, you have to be ready to act once you receive the results of one of our studies, because it tells you immediately what to do, at least with respect to whether it be marketing or at least designing a follow-up experiment. So you can literally iterate in a day and run 3 subsequent experiments and potentially crack the code, right? Not always. Or it can tell you, hey, you know what? I don't think there's really not anything here that's sort of tangible. We need to go back and rethink this a little more and come up with new ideas, right? And then finally, we often deal, I often deal with people who've tried something before and invested a lot of time and effort and money into a project and an idea, and they come to us and they say, well, something's not working, right? So what we typically say is, look, we can potentially help you, but especially for new companies and startups, we want to catch them early, because the cost of getting it wrong, right? You may not be able to recover from that. Right? And sometimes you really only get one chance. And so this is why we say early on, late stage, early stage, even just in the early phases of, do we even have something that's viable here? Figure it out. Do the experiments. They're super easy, very easy to interpret, and it immediately tells you what's working and what's not. Okay, so that's a really good question, Sharon. How long does it take to run an experiment start to finish? Well, if you have a team of people who are really tuned in to what it is that they want, a brainstorming session can take about 30 minutes. So literally in 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, we can have ideas that we can put into an experiment. And let's assume we have a moderate sample size of 150 people. We can have those results back in anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. So start to finish could just be a couple hours. So if you set aside an entire day and you wanted to run the first experiment, take the winning ideas, add some new ideas, run a follow-up experiment and a follow-up after that, in one day, you could run 3 or 4 experiments. So, yeah. What if you don't have your own group but need your consumer panels? I think, are you asking about if you don't have your own respondents? That's fine. We can get those respondents for you. I think that's your question, right?
I'll also add that if it's your own respondents, then it could take longer. So usually when we have clients that want to source respondents from their own customer database rather than use our panel respondents, it generally takes longer. Whereas the panel respondents are available, and that's what they're there to do. So it gets them super fast.
Yeah, no, we can access a large volume of consumers all around the world in real time. Right. And in fact, Brian, you've gone through this exercise, and you've seen how super. When we talk about lightning speed, we're talking about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The results are in, and they're automated, and most of it's automated. And so really it's a straightforward process. It's really coming up with the ideas. Running the experiment is very, very straightforward. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, Brian. Thanks and your team for inviting us in. We're perfectly happy to speak to you and others who want to learn more about what we're doing. We truly believe, this is a science that was developed in the real world, battle tested in the real world, and we have a pretty good pedigree of science in the published literature, but real actionable impact that I think would be very, very useful to your clients and members in your network. So we're perfectly happy to schedule additional calls if need be, and discuss the MindCart platform with them and how they might be able to incorporate it either in their own business or with some of their clients. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll send out a follow-up email with your information with a recording of this meeting. If anybody has a need of any sort, I mean, that's the whole purpose of ShapeConnect is you go to your dashboard and you put in, I have a business need, and we curate partners like MindCart or whoever else can help your company. But you'll have everybody's contact information, and feel free to connect from there. So we appreciate everybody attending, and we'll see you at our next event. We'll be doing these monthly, and we'll have a series of different expert guest speakers each month. So looking forward to connecting with everyone once again.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You.
Thank you.